At dawn, a soldier bellows for Enkrid to wake while the ramshackle camp stirs behind him. This is the unglamorous morning awaiting the 4th Squad's weary commander. A moment later, Rem peers into his boot and finds the hidden insect. Enkrid lies awake beside him, surrounded by the unruly squad he has been demoted to command. Narilia's banners and spearheads rise beneath the sunset as the army gathers for battle. The fighting immediately overwhelms Enkrid. He catches one enemy blade on his sword and shield, but the impact drives him backward through the crushing melee. Another enemy smashes Enkrid back into the dirt. As weapons close around him, the certainty that this battle will be his end finally settles in. Knocked into the dirt, Enkrid claws toward the sword lying just beyond his fingertips. Even wounded and surrounded, his first instinct is still to reach for it. Bloodied but conscious, Enkrid braces himself with one hand while the other remains locked around his sword. His battered body may fail, but his grip refuses to. At last, Enkrid collapses beside the weapon he fought to keep. Blood spreads beneath him while his shield and sword lie within reach. Death does not bring silence. Enkrid's curled body drifts through a dark blue void, while rings of light spread beneath him, pulling his consciousness somewhere unexpected. Enkrid's eyes snap open beneath a familiar hand and the same shouted command to wake. The battlefield is gone. Somehow he is back at the morning's beginning. The repeated day leads to the same ending. A hidden swordsman appears behind Enkrid and drives a blade clean through his throat before he can turn. Another reset begins with the same cook hammering a pan and shouting everyone awake. The ridiculous little detail confirms that Enkrid has returned to mourning yet again. Back in battle, the masked swordsman closes in exactly as before. Enkrid recognizes the helmet, the poised blade, and the fatal attack waiting to repeat. From above, Enkrid and the masked killer meet inside a ring of fighting soldiers. Every path around him has narrowed back to the same lethal confrontation. By the 17th attempt, Enkrid knows exactly who is coming. The masked swordsman lunges with the same low posture and the same mercilessly precise blade. The thrust is still too fast. Enkrid tumbles onto his back amid the soldiers, blood pooling beneath him as another carefully studied attempt ends in death. On the 18th morning, Enkrid calmly warns Rem that a bug is hiding in his boot. His impossible foreknowledge turns an ordinary remark into a deliberate test. Rem freezes and peers down at his boot, visibly baffled. Enkrid has named the irritation before the sharp-eyed axeman could notice anything himself. Enkrid pushes through the tent flap, wondering how many more repeats it will take before the day finally releases him. Years earlier, a much younger Enkrid practiced alone beneath the trees until he could barely stand. His first sword lessons were built from exhaustion, repetition, and stubborn enthusiasm. A retired mercenary tells the exhausted boy that he truly could become a knight. Enkrid's stunned face shows how deeply that first sincere encouragement takes root. In the boy's imagination, a legendary knight stood alone beneath a towering enemy and a burning sky. That impossible figure became the shape of Enkrid's future dream. Young Enkrid stares ahead with fierce certainty, imagining himself as the legendary Knight of the End. Admiration has already hardened into a life's ambition. Mercenary life answers that dream with ridicule. A veteran hoists his barrel and loudly declares that Enkrid is not even good enough for their lowly profession. Enkrid keeps working until experience finally shows in his posture and strength. Standing over a defeated beast, he can at least see proof that the years changed him. That confidence shatters when a gifted child defeats him. Enkrid remains on his knees in the dirt while the young victor walks away without sharing his exhaustion. Alone afterward, Enkrid falls forward until his forehead nearly touches the ground. The humiliating defeat leaves him questioning whether years of sacrifice have carried him anywhere. Still, Enkrid returns to the sword. He drives through another swing with aching arms and fierce concentration, refusing to let disappointment decide when his training ends. Years later, that persistence has earned Enkrid command of a so-called second-rate squad. His men gather behind him, hardly the heroic order he once imagined leading. Rem studies Enkrid with open suspicion, comparing his quiet intensity to a wildcat's stare. The repeated deaths have changed the commander enough for his squadmate to notice. Enkrid's blue eyes hold a calm, unwavering focus. His expression has hardened into quiet resolve. The day resets again, and Enkrid immediately returns to training. Each new life becomes another chance to test his nerve against an attack that once seemed invisible. On the battlefield, Enkrid turns before a spear can reach his back. Repetition has transformed a lethal surprise into one more movement he can anticipate. Enkrid raises his round shield and catches the incoming strike with a shower of sparks. For once, his foreknowledge lets him intercept danger before it reaches another soldier. The rescued soldier stares up in disbelief, but the battlefield has already produced another threat behind him. One altered moment cannot make the surrounding chaos safe. The reprieve lasts only a heartbeat. Vel falls despite Enkrid's intervention, while the masked swordsman waits nearby and pulls the altered battle back toward its familiar tragedy. Then the masked swordsman steps from the carnage, blade hanging calmly at his side. Enkrid has reached the opponent who ended every previous attempt. Enkrid recalls Rem's brutal demonstration. Fear turns the body away before the attack lands. To survive, he must face the blade instead of surrendering to instinct. The answer sharpens in Enkrid's eye. Death no longer weakens his resolve. Every ending has trained his senses and made the next attempt stronger. This time, Enkrid moves with the slash instead of freezing. The blade sweeps past his body, and the attack that killed him 20 times finally misses. A cold promise insists this day will never end, but Enkrid's bright, focused eye answers differently. One successful dodge has proved that the wall can change. Morning returns once more, and Rem finds Enkrid already sitting upright. Instead of waking in panic, the commander is calm enough to unsettle the man beside him. Enkrid tightens one hand into a quiet fist. That tiny gesture carries his decision. The next repeated day will be another challenge, not another defeat. By the 33rd battle, Enkrid can finally follow the point racing toward him. His wide, focused eye tracks a thrust that once vanished before he could react. Seeing the attack is not enough. Enkrid hits the ground with blood on his face, teeth clenched as he admits the masked swordsman is still too fast. A memory returns of Enkrid walking away from slain monsters while villagers watch from the road. He once risked his life there simply because they needed protection. The villagers could offer only a small blue charm. Resting in Enkrid's palm, the humble trinket was said to answer one desperate prayer. Now the same charm glows beside Enkrid's dying body. As blood spreads beneath him, he wonders whether this gift is what keeps returning him to today. The masked killer peers around his blade with a bright, predatory eye. His supposed mercy is exposed for what it is, pleasure in delivering the same death again. Back at dawn, Enkrid pounds a metal ladle against a round shield, filling the camp with an unbearable clang. Another repeated morning becomes his training ground. Once Rem is awake, Enkrid makes his purpose plain. He asks the axeman to teach him the heart of the beast yet again, using another life for instruction. Rem examines Enkrid's suddenly tougher demeanor and demands an explanation. Enkrid offers only the truth he can safely reveal. He has been training. Enkrid turns away with a practiced spear resting across his shoulder. The conversation is over. He is ready to prove the change through another spar. Standing squarely behind his practice sword, Enkrid waits for Rem's first move. Courage helped him dodge death, but now he needs a way to strike back. Rem's attack tears past in a blur, yet Enkrid slips around it with his face inches from danger. His repeated evasions are finally becoming controlled movement. Enkrid bends beneath another sweeping strike and relies on the only foundation he has, the practical, much-mocked sword tricks taught by Valen mercenaries. Rem launches himself overhead and attacks Enkrid's weak lower body from above. Every exchange exposes another flaw that ordinary sword practice never corrected. Enkrid suddenly drives forward with the masked killer's own thrust. Rem twists aside in midair, surprised by a technique sharper than anything his commander used before. Rem's eye hardens as he studies the copied stab. More than 100 fatal demonstrations have left Enkrid with emotion that even this veteran must respect. Rem rubs his neck and admits the strike should have drawn blood. The praise is real, but his puzzled expression says Enkrid's sudden progress makes no sense. Enkrid focuses on the flaw Rem identifies. A killing thrust cannot leave room to wonder what happens if it fails. Hesitation weakens the blade before impact. Looking down at his own hand, Enkrid finally understands the crude lesson. The masked killer attacks as though victory is already decided, while Enkrid still expects doubt. Back on the battlefield, Enkrid braces on one hand as the masked swordsman's point drops toward him. This familiar position gives him another chance to answer with conviction. Enkrid explodes forward beneath the descending weapon and commits his own stab without hesitation. For the first time, his counter carries the genuine intent to kill. Enkrid surges over the fallen killer and drives his sword down with both hands. Each failed loop has moved his counterattack another fraction closer to completion. The masked man pins Enkrid beneath a shield and offers the same mocking mercy. Another death follows, but the exchange has become practice rather than proof of defeat. On the 124th attempt, both fighters rush together through the burning melee. Enkrid's body now follows a path carved by every previous death. Enkrid's practiced thrust stops above Rem's exposed neck. The attack has finally become fast and committed enough to force even the veteran axeman down. Morning finds Enkrid's hand split open around his sword. He is trained until blood runs across the guard, refusing to loosen the grip behind his new thrust. Enkrid grins through exhaustion, sweat streaking his face as he savors his hard-won progress. Enkrid drives the copied stab forward with his entire body, teeth clenched against the strain. He is stripping hesitation from the technique before facing its original owner again. Their weapons collide in a violent flash. Enkrid keeps his eyes open through the impact, forcing himself to read every detail instead of surrendering to fear. Standing over his wounded opponent, the masked man raises his sword and offers mercy once again. The word sounds crueler each time Enkrid hears it. The masked killer smiles and insists that the dead have no tomorrow. Enkrid hears the taunt differently now, because death has always delivered him another version of today. On the next morning, Enkrid personally orders a soldier to find shin armor, a shield, and a dagger. His sudden specificity leaves the men behind him speechless. The squad watches their commander leave and trades nervous jokes about his strange intensity. None of them understands what more than 100 deaths have done to him. Every death still hurts. Enkrid curls around the agony of another ending, teeth bared as he wonders how many more repetitions his body can endure. In the darkness between lives, Enkrid considers accepting the strength he has already gained. The lonely figure hesitates, tempted to walk away from the wall. Then Enkrid's expression hardens. Surviving is no longer enough. He must surpass the masked swordsman and prove that this wall can truly be broken. Enkrid rejects that surrender and throws himself back into punishing preparation. Even another hard fall is useful if it brings him closer to the next confrontation. One remembered obstacle becomes a concrete plan. Catch the incoming strike on his shield, then spin into a slash before the attacker can recover. The plan works. Enkrid drives his shield into the enemy's legs and sends the interfering soldier crashing down before the main duel can begin. A violent impact hurls Vel through the surrounding ranks and drops him behind Enkrid. The battlefield has fallen into the exact arrangement Enkrid remembers. Enkrid crouches beside the fallen Vel, while the masked swordsman looms over them. With another soldier down, the recurring duel is ready to begin. Every smaller obstacle cleared, Enkrid finally faces the masked swordsman alone. The enemy's point hangs in the foreground, but this meeting now begins on Enkrid's terms. The masked fighter dives through the battle with his blade ready, but Enkrid's new shield and practiced footwork have changed the opening he expects. A sharp counter snaps Enkrid's head sideways. Even with better equipment, the opponent can still punish one mistake before Enkrid completes his answer. The familiar thrust comes, and Enkrid twists over the masked swordsman instead of retreating. He's lived through every variation and finally moves ahead of it. The masked swordsman's blade fractures into flying shards. The weapon that killed Enkrid again and again has finally broken apart. At the center of the melee, Enkrid controls the duel while fallen troops surround them. Beyond the fighters, a distant arrow is already racing toward the opening. Rem charges through the battlefield, roaring that he will hunt down the claw of the hawk. A warning follows immediately. The distant shot is already too late to stop. Sweat beads across Enkrid's face as he fixes his eye on the last opening. He is ready to finish the masked swordsman with the thrust learned from him. The final impact tears the masked fighter's helmet free. After months trapped before the same opponent, Enkrid has finally broken through the wall that kept killing him. A fresh impact whips Enkrid's head sideways before he can enjoy the victory. The wider battle has not paused simply because he overcame one impossible enemy. A blue-skinned warrior surges into view with one hand extended and fury across his face. This new attacker belongs to the feared warrior race called frogs. The frog warrior finds Enkrid collapsed beside the fighter he defeated. Towering over the wounded commander, the blue-skinned newcomer prepares to erase the man who spoiled his plans. Before the blow lands, Rem crashes into the frog from the side. Axe and blade collide above Enkrid as his squadmate throws himself between them. Rem attacks with explosive power, but the frog bends around the swinging axe and counters from an impossible angle. Both warriors are forced airborne by the exchange. Landing in a crouch, Rem measures the frog's speed and resilience. Brute force alone may not finish this opponent. A perfect strike through the heart might. Rem smiles and plants himself between the frog and Enkrid. Anyone who wants the squad commander's head will first need permission from the axeman guarding him. The frog stares in disbelief at the wounded man behind Rem. He had assumed the terrifying axeman was commander, not the apparently weaker soldier on the ground. The frog turns his back and walks away while Rem's blade remains ready in the foreground. He has decided this minor fight is not worth the cost. Rem calls the retreating frog a coward but does not chase. Protecting his injured commander matters more than proving who would win their unfinished fight. With the frog occupied, Enkrid's surviving squadmates drive into the surrounding Aspen soldiers. One brutal strike sends blood across the collapsing enemy line. The battered Aspen fighters finally turn and run. Narillion blades chase them from the field, ending the battle that trapped Enkrid for more than 100 mornings. A column of blue light erupts from the black surface inside Enkrid's unconscious mind. A huge violet fist surges through the blue void toward Enkrid as he braces beneath it. Enkrid answers with clear, unwavering eyes. A wall is not proof that his path ends. It is simply another obstacle waiting to be overcome. His vision returns to an unfamiliar tent ceiling and a small hanging lantern. The repeated barracks are gone, meaning Enkrid has finally awakened beyond yesterday. Rem leans over the infirmary bed and explains that Enkrid slept for 2 straight days. The axeman's blunt concern confirms just how narrowly his commander survived. Krace arrives next with arms folded and a demand for repayment. Whatever sympathy brought him to the infirmary is quickly buried beneath his talent for collecting debts. Jackson leaves a small jar of ointment and precise instructions to apply it twice daily. The quiet gift reveals more concern than the aloof swordsman would ever admit. Auden looks down at the bandaged commander and admits the squad has been worried. His unusually gentle expression makes their concern impossible for Enkrid to dismiss. Ragna appears at the bedside next, fruit in hand, and his usual unreadable stare intact. His arrival completes the squad's awkward procession of concern. From his bed, Enkrid surveys the infirmary's other occupants. 2 wounded soldiers rest nearby, including a blonde stranger whose calm presence feels oddly out of place. A sharp-eyed ferry officer steps into the tent and looks down at Enkrid. Her polished armor and commanding posture silence the patients before she says another word. The ferry officer coolly reminds the patients that her people expect proper respect from those beneath them. Her steady stare makes the correction feel like an order. After formally praising Enkrid's handling of the 4th squad, the company commander turns to leave. Enkrid watches, surprised that her entire visit could be so brief. Before she goes, the blonde patient awkwardly supplies a name, Krang. His strained smile and obvious hesitation make the simple introduction sound suspicious. Enkrid watches the company commander's cape disappear through the tent entrance. Her abrupt departure leaves him wondering what she truly came to inspect. Most of Enkrid's pain has faded, so he presses a hand to his bandaged chest and decides to resume training. Recovery is only useful if he moves forward. At the yard, Enkrid visualizes the masked swordsman's final stab in brutal detail. Reconstructing the lethal instant lets him examine what his own body must do next. His mind turns to Rem's acts, every follow-up delivered with lethal commitment. Enkrid needs that same continuity so one failed thrust does not end his attack. Cronj watches from the ground as Enkrid admits the dream behind his training. However little talent he has, Enkrid still intends to become a knight. Crange reaches toward Enkrid instead of laughing. For the first time, someone hears that impossible ambition and responds with respect rather than ridicule. With a quiet smile, Krang asks Enkrid to remember his name after becoming a knight. He calls him a friend, giving the dream rare human support. Later, Enkrid thanks his squad mate for checking on him and confirms the medicine worked. His relaxed smile shows that the battlefield injuries are finally easing. Night settles over the infirmary, and Krang wishes Enkrid good night from the next bed. Nothing in the quiet tent warns Enkrid that an assassin is approaching. Morning begins with the same soldier asking about Enkrid's injuries. The familiar question sounds ordinary, but its exact repetition immediately catches the commander's attention. Even Enkrid's reply about the medicine returns word for word. As the sentence leaves his mouth, he recognizes the unmistakable rhythm of another loop. Enkrid's eye snaps wide with the realization he died during the peaceful night without sensing anything. A new wall has appeared inside the camp. In the darkness between loops, Enkrid stands alone and compares this painless death with the agony he understood. Being killed without noticing feels far more disturbing. Enkrid reasons through the attack with one bright, tense eye. No obvious enemy entered the camp, so a hidden assassin is almost certainly already among them. Suspicion follows the fairy commander as she walks away from the infirmary. Her silent movement and knowledge of the tent make her the first person Enkrid watches. A poison needle strikes before Enkrid sees anyone enter. He crashes beside the bed, unable to move or speak while the other patients remain helpless. Vengeance lies rigid across the next bed, eyes closed and jaw slack. A poison needle protrudes from his neck as the only visible sign of the attack. A hooded assassin pins the blonde Krang and drives a dagger into him. Enkrid can only watch the real target bleed while poison locks his body in place. Cronj lies rigid on the bed, eyes wide and blood running from his mouth. The easygoing stranger has been reduced to the assassin's helpless victim. Enkrid's eye shifts toward another movement in the dark tent. A second presence has entered, turning the assassination into something more complicated than he expected. From the floor, Enkrid sees a hooded figure framed in the infirmary entrance. The intruder's controlled posture feels different from the assassin already inside. Beneath the hood is the ferry company commander. Her pointed ear and focused expression confirm Enkrid recognized her, but not whether she came to kill or intervene. On the third infirmary morning, Enkrid keeps his eyes lowered and every sense alert. Even total concentration cannot reveal the assassin's presence before the attack. Helplessness recalls the masked swordsman who once looked equally impossible. Enkrid remembers the exchange he finally won and refuses to believe this enemy has no opening. Enkrid tests his timing by cutting tiny insects around the tent. Vengeance watches the bizarre exercise and loudly calls his fellow patient completely insane. Vengeance leans forward in outrage when Enkrid answers with sarcasm. The short-haired officer's wounded pride turns a useful test into another childish argument. Krang enters while Enkrid stands beside the beds. Enkrid watches the blonde stranger approach and studies him with open suspicion. Enkrid finally asks Krang the bluntest possible question, "What are you?" Krang rises beside the bed, understandably unsure how anyone should answer that. Krang declines to explain, and Enkrid accepts the refusal with a quiet look. He cannot force out the secret, but the evasive answer confirms there is one. Vengeance points accusingly and demands Krang name his country, twisting one vague answer into proof of espionage. His interrogation is much louder than it is useful. Krang's easy smile disappears. With clear, steady eyes, he insists he has never harmed the kingdom and never intends to betray it. In Enkrid's imagination, Krang carries the cloak and presence of a knight beneath the night sky. That aura clashes sharply with his helplessness during the assassination. That night, Enkrid leans close and warns both patients that assassins will enter the tent soon. Cooperation, he says, is their only chance to live. Vengeance rolls away and declares that Enkrid has lost his mind. The warning sounds impossible to anyone who has not already died through the attack. Enkrid's eyes widen at a faint movement in the darkness. His warning has changed the room's tension, and the hidden enemy is no longer waiting patiently. A concealed blade flashes down beside Krang before Enkrid can finish asking when the attack will begin. Changing the plan has only made the strike arrive sooner. On the next morning, Enkrid stands over the beds and chooses a new approach. He will predict the exact instant the assassins appear, then shout first. Enkrid shouts now, but a blade is already sweeping across his throat. His prediction is close enough to trigger the attack, yet not fast enough to stop it. Another unseen strike hurls Enkrid backward against the tent wall. Fighting an enemy he cannot track leaves every defense a fraction too late. The count reaches 20 failed mornings. Crouched outside with sweat on his face, Enkrid admits that this wall has denied him even one meaningful exchange. Enkrid leaves the infirmary with a new priority: learn how to evade an attack faster than sight. One elusive squadmate immediately comes to mind. Rem grips his axe while Enkrid listens. With a flat look, he says that Wildcat is simply what people call Jackson. Enkrid pictures Jackson wrapped in shadow against a stone wall. If anyone understands how an unseen attacker approaches, it is the squad's quiet ambush specialist. Enkrid asks Jackson how someone could stop one of his backstabs. Jackson looks up calmly and offers the bleak answer: none of his targets ever survived. Enkrid stands over the seated Jackson and asks how he could stop a stab from an ambusher like him, turning the conversation toward sensing danger without looking. Without even turning his head, Jackson calmly identifies something hidden behind the tents. Enkrid can only stare, realizing his companion noticed what his eyes completely missed. A wagon wheel jolts as its axle begins to fail, exactly matching Jackson's warning. The ordinary breakdown becomes a striking demonstration of how tiny sounds reveal what comes next. As they walk between the tents, Jackson tells Enkrid to keep listening and isolate one noise at a time. Enkrid follows closely, absorbing every practical instruction. Enkrid lowers his gaze and turns the lesson toward the threat haunting him. If he can sense a silent approach, he may finally survive long enough to counter it. Night falls, and the hooded assassin drops into the camp with terrifying silence. Enkrid's training has begun, but the killer still moves through his awareness unnoticed. The blade reaches Enkrid before his body can answer. Blood spreads across his chest, and another failed attempt ends with the assassin still completely beyond his senses. Morning returns, yet Enkrid rises with something the reset cannot erase. His posture steadies as he realizes his body still remembers every hour spent training his hearing. Jackson explains that sound carries direction, distance, and position. Listening carefully enough can become a second pair of eyes, giving Enkrid a way to track what he cannot see. Enkrid begins with the flags above the camp, picking each flat from the surrounding footsteps and voices. One ordinary sound at a time, he sharpens his new sense. Seated motionless with his eyes closed, Enkrid sorts familiar noises from unfamiliar ones. Krang approaches with a puzzled smile, but the focused squad leader refuses to look up. Krang watches the strange exercise with open amusement, yet his smile carries genuine trust. He knows Enkrid would never endure such ridicule without a serious reason. That trust cannot protect him at night. The assassin crashes into the tent and drives a blade through both men, ending Enkrid's 33rd attempt in a burst of blood. On the next night, the hooded killer descends again from the darkness. Enkrid has repeated the lesson, but the assassin's silent approach remains faster than his awareness. Back beneath the daylight flags, Enkrid returns to the same seated drill. Every flat becomes another clue as he searches patiently for the detail his hearing still lacks. Beneath the flag, Enkrid closes his eyes and steadies his hands, committing himself to the same exercise again and again. Krang leans over his motionless leader and freezes in surprise. Enkrid sensed him arriving without opening his eyes, the clearest proof yet that the training is working. Looking down at Enkrid, Krang finally understands the closed eyes and endless stillness. This is not eccentric behavior. The squad leader has been training his perception. When the assassin strikes again, Enkrid twists away at the last possible instant. The blade passes beside him, turning an invisible execution into an attack he can finally evade. Enkrid surges forward over his fallen companions and knocks the assassin backward. For the first time, the hooded killer is off balance and forced to face him directly. The assassin lunges again, but Enkrid bends beneath the sweeping strike. His successful dodge shatters the killer's certainty and proves that the ambush no longer controls the fight. Enkrid meets the assassin's glare without flinching and decides he can handle him. The killer may be experienced, but losing surprise has stripped away his greatest advantage. The hooded attacker surges through Enkrid's guard with his short blade raised. Krang remains nearby, leaving Enkrid no safe retreat from the renewed assault. A brutal kick lifts Enkrid off his feet and sends him flying across the tent. The assassin immediately closes the distance, ready to finish the wounded squad leader. Before the next blade lands, the ferry company commander flashes between them. Her cold stare and drawn sword announce that the assassin has gained a far more dangerous opponent. The assassin recoils as the commander blocks his path, stunned to discover that Krang came with such a formidable protector. His confidence gives way to open alarm. From the floor, Enkrid tracks the clash with wide, focused eyes. He cannot match their speed, so he studies the rhythm and waits for one usable opening. The commander dives past the assassin's cloak, pressing him with another precise strike. Her relentless attack makes her allegiance unmistakable. She came to protect Krang. Seeing the opening, Enkrid throws his whole body into the fight. He drives forward beneath the flying blades, refusing to let the commander's pressure go to waste. After the assassin breaks away, the commander stands beside Enkrid and questions the attack. Together they reach the same conclusion. Krang, not the ordinary soldiers, was the target. The commander turns toward Krang, while Enkrid watches from behind. Krang calmly asks her for one favor, shifting the tense aftermath away from vengeance and toward rescue. Krang looks directly at the commander and asks that nobody die today, turning the violent aftermath toward mercy. Flames erupt through the medical tent as soldiers drag the wounded outside. The staged disaster hides the assassination attempt while giving every survivor a believable escape. Walking away beneath the dark trees, the commander asks whether Enkrid changed Krang's mind. Krang quietly admits that the supposedly ordinary squad leader has become interesting. At dawn, Enkrid lowers his head beneath the bright morning sky. The quiet pause shows the strain of the night before giving way to another day. Before leaving the forest, Krang pauses alone beneath the trees with his bag over one shoulder. His silence shows how deeply Enkrid's intervention has changed his thinking. Far from the camp, the assassin's strange weapon crumbles into black fragments against the night sky. The dissolving blade leaves a clear warning that this conflict is not finished. Back in daylight, Enkrid sharpens his sword and measures himself against the commander. He can sense almost everything now, yet her presence remained completely beyond his awareness. Vengeance sits awkwardly on a crate and asks why Enkrid saved him. Seen from behind, Enkrid answers with simple certainty, "Comrades do not need another reason." Carrying his gear back to the unit, Enkrid hears an off-screen warning that the mood ahead is terrible and asks what happened. That trouble erupts behind them as Rem and Ragna collide in another violent brawl. Their axe and swords send nearby soldiers scattering before Enkrid even reaches the tent. The fight barrels through the camp with Rem charging and Ragna striking back. Terrified soldiers flee, convinced the crazy squad has become more dangerous without its leader. Enkrid's voice finally stops the destruction. Rem and Ragna turn toward him in disbelief, while their exhausted leader wonders whether these two might be his real curse. 4 days later, dawn spreads across the mountains before the camp wakes. The quiet sky marks Enkrid's return to a routine built around deliberate early training. Jackson wears an amused, knowing smile, fully awake and alert. Watching Enkrid prepare, Jackson tells him to keep practicing. The lesson in hearing has worked, but maintaining that sharpened awareness will require the same steady habit. Outside, Enkrid discovers Auden performing push-ups beneath an enormous boulder. The giant smiles through the impossible weight, treating monstrous strength as an ordinary morning exercise. Enkrid studies Auden's towering frame and silently wonders whether the man is simply too large. Even so, he accepts the offer to strengthen his own body. Auden abruptly demonstrates his feared frog kick, driving Enkrid down with enough force to make the promised body training feel immediately dangerous. Enkrid steps between the furious squad mates and orders the violence to stop. With Auden beside him, the squad leader restores enough calm to address the morning duty. Auden gestures toward the irritated Ragnat and complains that the directionally challenged swordsman will leave them starving. The fight finally gives way to the squad's breakfast duty. Auden recoils as Ragna crowds him, snapping that the swordsman smells. Even after the weapons are lowered, the squad's hostility immediately turns into another petty argument. Enkrid redirects Rem's restless energy into a proper duel. The axeman accepts instantly, swinging with crushing force while Enkrid braces himself behind the heart of the beast. Rem's blows hammer against Enkrid's guard, but sharpened hearing helps him follow every impact. He holds the line and searches the storm of steel for a narrow opening. Enkrid commits to his practiced thrust, but Rem catches the attack and drives him headfirst into the ground. The exchange ends before Enkrid's blade can touch him. Kneeling beside his planted sword, Enkrid absorbs Rem's criticism without looking away. The defeat hurts, yet he can feel that he is no longer the same fighter. Enkrid raises his sword and immediately asks for another fight. Repetition has carried him this far, and his unwavering stare tells Rem that one defeat will not stop him. Rem shoulders his weapon and accepts the challenge with a condition. Before earning another duel, Enkrid must prove his progress by leaving even one dent on him. Rain begins before the rematch can start. Rem stalks away with his weapon over one shoulder, furious that the endless downpour has canceled yet another promising duel. Inside the tent, Rem looks toward the doorway while the squad debates the curse rumor. Even the worsening rain becomes fresh evidence in their increasingly absurd theory. At the tent entrance, Enkrid stands against the downpour and trains his hearing. Behind him, the squad watches this new ritual with a mixture of mockery and interest. That night, company officers gather around a map to discuss their damaged reconnaissance force. The empty scouting ranks demand a replacement before winter closes the battlefield. The ferry company commander calmly proposes an unlikely replacement, Enkrid of the 444th. Her belief that he might produce unexpected results silences the skeptical officers. Summoned before the commander, Enkrid looks up in disbelief as the transfer order reaches him. Nothing in his experience has prepared him to lead a reconnaissance mission. The commander folds her hands beneath her chin and holds a cool, unreadable stare. Enkrid quietly absorbs the news that he is being sent with the scouts, studying the assignment instead of wasting energy on an argument. His squad mates cannot understand why the company commander selected Enkrid specifically, and their blunt questions leave him searching for an explanation too. Rem sharpens his axe and casually offers to help Enkrid escape the assignment, making his dangerous version of assistance sound almost perfectly reasonable. With his back turned, Ragna faces Enkrid across the tent and hesitates, unable to finish his reply. Raja plainly offers to go in Enkrid's place, stepping forward with complete confidence despite having no idea where the mission will lead. Jackson asks whether the scouts are heading into the tall grass fields, and Enkrid immediately pays attention to the experienced soldier's concern. Jackson tells Enkrid to listen for changes in the grass, because a sudden disturbance may reveal an attacker before anyone can see one. Enkrid remembers being moved from post to post because of his weak skills, filling gaps wherever the army happened to need another body. Rem's axe crashes against Jackson's knife in a violent flash, proving how quickly their ordinary bickering can become a genuinely lethal exchange. Watching the two fighters, Enkrid admits that his troublesome squad mates possess frightening skill, while his own loss would barely reduce the unit's combat power. Enkrid accepts that scouts will face the front line, but sees the danger as precious time to keep training the sharper senses he just gained. Andrew sneers at Enkrid and calls him useless, boasting that only Enkrid's unusually capable squad mates keep his pathetic unit functioning at all. Andrew rallies his scouts with a loud order to smash any enemy they meet, and the men answer their squad leader with eager obedience. A scout suddenly spots a line of hoofprints along the path, drawing the entire group's attention to the first trail they have found. Andrew immediately decides the tracks promise fresh meat and urges everyone onward, already celebrating the barbecue he expects them to enjoy that night. Henri studies the prints and flatly corrects his leader. They do not belong to Anu at all. but to an ordinary gazelle. As they walk, Henri explains how animals create separate paths through these fields and offers to teach Enkrid more of his hunting knowledge tomorrow. Andrew crouches in frustration and mutters that he needs results, while the exhausted men behind him use the pause to recover their strength. The scouts finally reach Green Pearl, an immense field where rolling grass rises high enough to hide armed men and erase the horizon. Andrew orders the squad to cross the field, capture the hostile scouts, and bring them back as prisoners, prompting an enthusiastic cheer from his men. The scouting party enters the towering grass in a single file, each soldier disappearing into vegetation that offers almost no view of what lies ahead. Inside Green Pearl, the path grows unnaturally still. Even the ground and grass show almost none of the animal activity such rich land should contain. A dark beast bursts from the grass with glowing eyes and bared teeth, racing past in obvious panic. Enkrid throws himself down and pulls the nearest scouts with him, reacting an instant before an unseen attack cuts through their former position. Green-cloaked Aspen soldiers rise from the grass at close range, shouting as their hidden formation finally reveals the enemy surrounding the scouts. Both groups crash together inside the grass, blades flashing as the small scouting party tries to break through the attackers closing around them. The fight fractures into desperate close combat, with Aspen soldiers striking from the reeds while Enkrid's scattered companions struggle to hold their ground. Seen from above, the trap is complete. Hidden soldiers encircle the tiny scouting party, leaving Enkrid and his men with no obvious route out. Arrows slice through the grass from several directions at once, forcing Enkrid to twist between converging shots while the ambush tightens around him. The next volley overwhelms Enkrid completely, arrows striking from every side until his attempt ends beneath a storm of shafts and whipping grass. Back at the beginning, Enkrid stares ahead and wonders whether escaping alone is the only possible answer to the deadly field waiting for them. Enkrid changes direction and forces a path through the grass, but the violent movement around him shows that another escape route has already closed. A green-uniformed Aspen soldier waits inside the reeds, confirming that the enemy dressed and positioned itself specifically for an ambush in this field. Another hidden attacker cuts Enkrid down, and his blood darkens the ground while yet another carefully tested escape route ends in failure. After so many prepared attacks, Enkrid realizes the Aspen force must be hiding something important here, and decides that he needs to discover what. Enkrid finally confronts Andrew face to face, declaring that his patience for orders from an incompetent leader has completely run out. Andrew's jaw tightens as Enkrid claims authority, but the scout leader refuses to accept the insult without testing the man himself. Enkrid studies Andrew's disciplined stance and the bodyguard beside him, recognizing signs that the arrogant scout leader received serious formal training. Andrew looks down at Enkrid and wonders whether the supposedly useless squad leader might actually be a fallen noble hiding his real background. Andrew shouts about the mission he must fulfill, but Enkrid cuts the speech short and refuses to be intimidated by his anger. Enkrid leaves his blade sheathed and calmly invites Andrew to attack, promising that he will not even need a sword for this duel. Andrew lunges with his sword raised, committing his whole body to the opening strike while Enkrid waits inside the weapon's descending path. Enkrid slips through the attack and sends Andrew flying, turning the scout leader's reckless momentum against him in one clean counter. Andrew's eyes flare wide as his base twists in shock, spit flying from his mouth. Henri and another scout recoil in shock at the claim that Enkrid won with a single blow. With Andrew beaten, Enkrid names taking command as the first step of his plan and faces the field with quiet, practiced resolve. The reorganized squad moves through the grass behind Enkrid in a disciplined column, following the leader who now knows exactly where death waits. Henri admits that he dreams of marrying a beautiful flower shop owner, and Enkrid answers that surviving today must come before that future. Two more scouts reveal the ordinary futures they still want. One hopes to open a business, while the other simply wants to return home. Andrew finally states his own mission with fierce seriousness. He intends to restore the fallen house gardener and reclaim his family's name. The surrounding scouts fall silent after Andrew's confession, their surprised faces showing how rarely their proud leader reveals what truly drives him. Enkrid raises his hand and warns the squad that he will not repeat the next order, demanding complete attention at the critical moment. Henri looses an arrow into the empty grass, the shaft streaking forward through a blur of branches and speed lines. The arrow strikes a concealed Aspen soldier, forcing the startled enemy to reveal himself before the rest of the ambush is ready. Enkrid charges through the opening, sword in hand, and shouts for Andrew to follow him. Enkrid reaches the first ambusher and drives him down at close range, turning the enemy's prepared field into the opening strike of his own plan. Enkrid tells the scouts they must find Aspen's soldiers first and ambush them, reversing the deadly pattern that controlled every previous attempt. The scouts surge from the grass while Aspen is still confused, using the surprise to cut down as many enemies as possible before they recover. Andrew and the others press their attack with blades drawn, shouting for the kill as the disrupted Aspen formation struggles to answer. The dark beast springs through the reeds with glowing blue eyes, moving so suddenly that both fighters and tall grass blur around it. The terrified animal crashes straight through the battlefield, scattering soldiers and creating a violent opening in the middle of the fight. Enkrid remembers that this same creature accidentally exposed the scouts during the first attempt, revealing why Aspen found them so quickly. Recognizing that the enemy is now distracted, Enkrid immediately orders his remaining scouts to move before Aspen can regain control of the field. The battered survivors hurry through the reeds behind Enkrid. 6 men are still moving, making this their strongest attempt so far. Andrew pushes himself close to exhaustion as darkness approaches, while Enkrid keeps guiding the wounded group deeper through the grass instead of retreating. Andrew blocks the route and refuses to follow Enkrid toward death, declaring that he will fight their captain if survival demands it. Enkrid grips his bloodstained sword and calmly cuts through the argument, telling Andrew that he wants to make one thing perfectly clear. Enkrid states that he wants to survive too, and Andrew's startled expression shows that the blunt admission reaches him more deeply than any order. Andrew remembers his mother's final wish: earn people's trust, grow into a true leader, and rebuild the family their father nearly destroyed. Bruised but unwavering, Enkrid looks ahead and asks for one thing: trust him. Andrew finally addresses Enkrid as captain, surrendering his resistance and placing both his life and the squad's direction in Enkrid's hands. Even Andrew's protective bodyguard accepts the decision, repeating the title of captain as the wounded squad prepares to follow Enkrid onward. Enkrid leads the scouts to the grass in a tight line and announces the second step, keeping every survivor low and controlled. At sunset, Enkrid reaches the exact stretch of grass he needs, emphasizing that their opportunity exists only here and only at this moment. The survivors slip through the reeds while nearby Aspen soldiers pass without noticing them, proving that Enkrid's carefully timed route is working. Enkrid watches the path ahead and confirms that every part of his plan has unfolded correctly, even as the last daylight disappears. Battered and bloodied, Enkrid and the surviving scouts push through the reeds until he tells them they have arrived. The group suddenly sees Aspen's camp ahead, and the shocked scouts realize that Enkrid has deliberately brought them into the enemy's base. With weapons ready, the surviving scouts race toward the camp together, following Enkrid into the most dangerous stage of his escape plan. The scouts stare at Enkrid in disbelief when he announces that they will set the enemy camp on fire from the inside. Enkrid turns a cold stare toward Mac and warns that he will not tolerate disobedience. The squad crashes through the shelter wall and discovers an empty interior, reacting in disbelief as they rush inside. Sweat and dust streak Enkrid's face as he looks ahead and gives the terse order to wait there. Enkrid explains that the hidden Aspen flag is the camp's true priority, and every soldier in the field has been deployed to protect it. Mac watches Enkrid with growing suspicion and decides this entire operation must be a secret mission assigned by the company commander. Enkrid watches Mac stop complaining and follow every instruction, accepting the soldiers' sudden cooperation even though its cause remains unclear. Enkrid remembers entering this camp many times before, but never was so many survivors still beside him to carry out the plan. The bait group breaks cover and races between the tents, drawing shouts of intruders. Aspen guards immediately charge after them. Enkrid raises a blazing torch above the camp, holding the fire that can finally turn this repeated day toward a possible tomorrow. A silent stranger steps into Enkrid's path, and Enkrid instantly realizes he has never encountered this dangerous man in any previous version of today. The stranger's cold stare and effortless presence tell Enkrid that this is no ordinary guard, leaving him to wonder where such strength came from. Flames rise behind the tents as distant soldiers shout the alarm, confirming that Andrew's group has successfully set the encampment on fire. With the camp erupting around them, Enkrid draws his blade and prepares to force a path past the unexpected fighter standing between him and escape. Enkrid drives forward with both hands locked around his sword, pouring his full weight and momentum into a single committed thrust. The stranger remains composed as Enkrid closes the distance, reading the incoming blade without showing the slightest fear or need to retreat. The counter sends Enkrid tumbling through the air, blood spraying from his side as the stranger dismantles his best attack in one motion. Enkrid crouches over his wound and admits the brutal result. Even his finest stab cannot defeat the opponent standing before him. Images of the grassland ambush flash through Enkrid's mind, reminding him how many battles and deaths were required just to reach this camp. Enkrid's blue eye sharpens as he looks back at the stranger, realizing that the true wall of this repeated day is standing here. Losing now means taking command again, crossing the lethal field again, and repeating countless versions of today before you can return here. Instead of despairing, Enkrid begins to laugh, and the confident stranger finally looks unsettled by the wounded man's impossible reaction. The stranger raises his blade and threatens to cut Enkrid apart, but the fury only gives Enkrid a clearer target for his next attempt. Enkrid clenches his fist and reduces the impossible opponent to one simple command for himself: overcome this wall, whatever the cost. Bloodied but steady, Enkrid lifts his gaze toward the stranger, his expression no longer showing defeat but determination for every attempt still ahead. The same bow carries into the next exchange. Wounded and badly outmatched, Enkrid steadies his stance, fixes his eyes on the stranger, and prepares to test the gap once more. The stranger meets Enkrid's blade with effortless control, yet one desperate parry earns a flicker of surprise. Enkrid immediately follows with an upward swing, forcing the veteran to take him seriously. Enkrid catches the veteran's descending blade, but the violent impact shows how little force and control he can bring against this opponent. The veteran's next attack sends Enkrid spinning away. He cannot recover quickly enough to counter, and simply staying alive becomes his only victory. Even an improvised strike fails to catch the veteran. He turns Enkrid's attack aside with the back of his hand, a casual response that makes the difference in their skill impossible to ignore. Aspen soldiers call desperately for their platoon commander as flames spread behind them, forcing the veteran to look away from his unfinished duel. The veteran studies Enkrid and realizes the wounded intruder will not fall quickly. With the camp burning, he cannot afford to finish this stubborn fight. The veteran withdraws with a calm promise that he and Enkrid will meet again, leaving their duel unfinished beside the burning camp. Left behind, Enkrid accepts that this opponent was not today's wall. The encounter only proves how much more he still needs to improve. A squadmate shouts that they must leave immediately, dragging Enkrid's attention away from the duel and back toward the escape. Enkrid looks toward the burning camp and accepts that the mission leaves no time to chase an opponent he cannot yet defeat. Enkrid gives the retreat order, forcing the exhausted survivors to abandon the burning camp before Aspen can close around them. The battered group counts only 5 men. With one soldier missing, they fear Aspen will send a full pursuit after the survivors. Their hope for a quiet escape dies almost immediately. Aspen soldiers surge after the 5 survivors, forcing Enkrid's exhausted squad to fight while they keep running. Henri guides them toward the dangerous habitat of field foxes and snakes. The route is difficult for everyone, but his knowledge of a hunter's path gives the squad its best chance. At last, the pursuing footsteps disappear. Andrew and Mac help shake the hunters. Henri found the route, and Enkrid realizes that every surviving member carried the squad through the escape. At dawn, the battered 5 stagger back into camp, and the soldiers waiting there stare at the returning squad in disbelief. Once the squad is safe, Enkrid finally admits that he is about to pass out, his exhausted body reaching its limit. Grey Dog's commander studies the ruined flag and cannot understand how a tiny enemy squad broke through his best troops, started a fire, and escaped. The Grey Dog is no ordinary company. Granted independent control and named for Aspen's relentless hounds, its soldiers are known as persistent lovers because once they choose a target, they never let go. Back in safety, Enkrid grips his sword and thinks about the wall he failed to overcome, already measuring how much stronger he must become. Across the battlefield, Mitch fixes Enkrid's face in his memory and promises that their unfinished duel will end in death. With Enkrid still missing, Rem sits alone and finally wonders whether the squad leader died during reconnaissance. Rem calls Enkrid a small fry, but his dark expression betrays the truth. He had genuinely started to like the man. Renj awakes to find Rem glaring at him, and one crude exchange turns their boredom into open hostility. Rem lunges at Ragna with murderous enthusiasm, transforming the squad's empty waiting time into another savage spar. Enkrid reports that he discovered the ambush, entered the enemy base, and burned it down, insisting that quick choices and luck carried him through. The company commander stares at Enkrid in disbelief. She had hoped he might achieve something but never expected a result this large. Enkrid gives the rescued soldier a restrained farewell and turns away, leaving the grateful survivor to watch him depart. The rescued soldiers bow and thank Enkrid before leaving, while the company commander stands behind them and observes the exchange. Beneath the passing sky, Enkrid reflects that repeated todays let him see beyond limits that once seemed permanent, even if the struggle still feels desperate. His true goal has never changed. He will become a knight. Every repeated today is another stone beneath his feet, and every brutal lesson is worth enduring if it carries him closer. Watching Ram and Ragna exchange blows, Enkrid realizes he has never seen either man wear such a serious expression while sparring with him. Enkrid chooses a concrete benchmark. One day he will force both monsters to face him with those same serious expressions. Ranya notices Enkrid has returned and lets the spar fall quiet, his expression shifting from combat focus to surprise. Ranya reacts with open disbelief when Enkrid tries to question him immediately after returning, while Rem tells their leader to rest. The battalion has already moved closer to Tallgrass Field after learning about the ambush, and the war continues without pause. His wounds have healed during the journey, and reflection has only sharpened his hunger. Ignoring every suggestion to rest, Enkrid returns to drills the moment the unit settles in. Ranya remembers how easily strength once came to him, and how a clear road toward knighthood still failed to give his talent any purpose. Enkrid repeats another punishing swing, his stubborn practice offering living proof that persistence can matter even when natural talent is absent. Ranya watches with folded arms and identifies the problem clearly. Enkrid learned every fundamental incorrectly and must rebuild them from the beginning. Ranya finally asks why Enkrid keeps driving his body through the same exhausting drills, unable to understand that level of effort. Enkrid answers that he trains because he wants to become stronger, a simple goal that only creates another question for Ragna. When Ragna asks what greater strength is for, Enkrid answers without hesitation he intends to become a knight, whatever it takes. Enkrid explains that his ideal knight decides what is right and raises a sword for honor rather than strength alone. He adds that a knight protects the sick, the poor, and the people he loves, leaving Ragna to consider those unfamiliar motives. Ranya stops Enkrid and calls out to his squad leader, choosing to continue their conversation before the two men part. Ranya looks directly at Enkrid and offers to teach him swordsmanship, placing the opportunity Enkrid has always wanted within reach. Ranya studies the eager look in Enkrid's eyes and reconsiders, finding enough curiosity there to make teaching him worthwhile. Ranya begins by asking what Rem taught him, and Enkrid names the heart of the beast as the center of his limited training. Ranya delivers the unpleasant diagnosis. Enkrid's mercenary shortcuts are embedded in every movement. Building new techniques on top of those habits would only lock his weaknesses in place. The choice is simple and merciless. Stay as he is, or tear everything down and begin again. Enkrid does not hesitate. If starting from nothing leads forward, then nothing is where he will start. Ranja decides Enkrid has enough raw strength for a longsword and offers a weapon exchange. The lesson will begin not with a secret technique, but with the tool Enkrid should have been using all along. With the blade in Enkrid's hands, Ragnar rebuilds his grip from the ground up, right hand forward, left hand behind. Even holding the weapon becomes a lesson in abandoning old instincts. Ranja asks who taught Enkrid that bad gripping habit. Hearing Rem's name immediately earns the barbarian another furious insult. Without warning, Ragnar tests the stance with a sudden strike. Enkrid's locked arms absorb the force badly, demonstrating the flaw more clearly than any patient explanation could. Ranja explains the principle in the language of broken things. Anything too stiff will snap when real force arrives. A swordsman must yield just enough to survive impact. Enkrid must learn to bend rather than brace. Ragnar orders him to loosen his grip and release the tension running through his entire body, replacing brute resistance with controlled flexibility. The corrections move lower to Enkrid's balance and center of gravity. Ragnar shows that a proper sword stroke begins in the whole body, not merely in the arms holding steel. Every attempt exposes another ugly habit. Ragnar mocks Enkrid's wrist-breaking angles and dance-like footwork, but beneath the insults he keeps stripping away years of improvised technique. After watching the drills, Ragnar bluntly declares that Enkrid lacks talent and never learned even the basic principles of using a sword. Ranja fixes Enkrid with a hard, unyielding stare, showing no sign that the difficult lesson has softened him. Rem arrives in the middle of the endless lesson and interrupts, finding Enkrid and Ragnar still occupied with training. Rem arrives and finds them still drilling while meals go cold. He ridicules Ragnar's fussy lesson and Enkrid's willingness to follow it, turning the training ground into another squad argument. The mockery sharpens into a threat. Rem warns that if Ragnar keeps tormenting their squad leader, he may lose a hand, an absurdly violent way of showing protective concern. The comedy ends at roll call. The squad gears up, weapons secured and formation restored because the war has finally reached their position again. A report confirms the threat. Enemy forces are approaching. Training is over and Enkrid must carry Ragnar's unfinished lessons directly onto a live battlefield. Beyond the camp, an enormous enemy formation advances in disciplined ranks, filling the distant field with soldiers and raised weapons. Watching Enkrid head toward battle, Ragnar wonders whether he unintentionally revealed too much of his own swordsmanship to the squad leader. As the armies close, Ragnar decides he should remain near Enkrid, quietly preparing to protect his unfinished student. Enkrid lowers his gaze, his focused profile showing that Ragnar's unfinished sword lesson is still occupying his thoughts. Enemy ranks and ragged black flags fill the field in a deliberate formation, revealing the scale and order of the advancing army. Hidden beneath a hood, an enemy caster completes the preparation and declares the battle finished before it begins. The strange formation was never meant to fight by conventional rules. A pale fog erupts across the field, swallowing distance, formations, and friendly faces in seconds. The Allied line loses sight of both the enemy and itself. Inside the whiteout, soldiers strain to understand what is happening. Then a sound travels through the fog from somewhere ahead, too faint to see and too dangerous to ignore. Enkrid recognizes the noise before anyone else. Arrows. The warning comes from hard-earned battlefield instinct, but the fog leaves only heartbeats for the soldiers to react. A black rain of arrows tears into the blinded formation, dropping soldiers who cannot see the archers firing through the fog. Far from the dying soldiers, the hooded caster laughs. The spell has turned an open battlefield into a private execution ground where only one army knows what it is shooting at. The caster savors the result because perfecting this spell demanded enormous effort. Every hidden preparation now pays off in the panic and casualties spreading through the blinded ranks. Grey Dog soldiers remain packed in disciplined ranks inside the fog, their formation intact while the opposing army stumbles blind. Grey Dog's officers admit the spell barely succeeded because the damaged flag came dangerously close to burning during Enkrid's infiltration. Mitch knows exactly who made the ritual so difficult, bitterly blaming the enemy soldier who damaged the flag. Through the chaos, Mitch spots Enkrid and recognizes him at once as the opponent from their unfinished duel. Enkrid hears Ragna behind him through the fog, using the familiar voice to place one squad mate he cannot see. Ren's voice comes from directly ahead, yet Enkrid's eyes still cannot identify him through the whiteout. His breathing tightens and his body stiffens, dragging every old habit back into place. Ragna had warned that unfinished training would collapse in real combat and might kill him. Death is already closing in, yet Enkrid hears Ragna claim he has found a way forward. If one attempt is not enough to learn it, Enkrid possesses the one advantage no teacher can imagine. Enkrid drives his blade into an enemy's throat, committing fully to the attack even as the surrounding soldiers close around him. The counterattack kills Enkrid exactly as intended. He accepts the fatal blow because death will return him to Ragna's lesson. The day resets on the training ground. Ragna criticizes Enkrid's downward swing, but struggles to explain why, revealing the curse of a natural genius who has never needed words for instinct. Ranya demonstrates the correct center and balance, however awkward his explanation. Enkrid changes strategy. He will watch every stance, remember every correction, and use repeated lives to translate genius into practice. Another battlefield attempt ends beneath an arrow before Enkrid can stabilize his new form, proving that one more lesson is still not enough. Blood runs down Enkrid's face as the loop closes again, yet his expression holds no fear of paying for another day of training. On the 31st today, Ragna notices Enkrid's improved step and finally declares him ready to begin the true basics. Ranya demonstrates the sword's 3 basic attacks, cutting, stabbing, and slashing, before showing how the blade's edge can defend. Ranya explains the line of attack. Enkrid must block the enemy's shortest route while extending a clear route for his own sword. Back in the fog, Enkrid's feet feel lighter. He dodges the first danger and manages a partial parry that was once impossible. Ranya watches Enkrid's diagonal slash and finally approves it, declaring that this fundamental movement needs no more correction. The next fog battle still ends in death, proving that each clean technique is only a small gain inside a lethal war. The progress is slow enough to be invisible to anyone living a single life. For Enkrid, each cleaner step and sharper angle is proof that repetition can move the impossible. On the 100th today, Enkrid drives through another repetition with a body transformed by accumulated corrections. Ranya stares at the result in shock, unable to understand how his supposedly untalented student improved so quickly. Ranya looks at Enkrid as if seeing a stranger and asks who he really is, stunned by the swordsman now standing before him. Enkrid realizes that repeated todays have carried him beyond the ceiling he once mistook for the limit of his talent. In combat, Enkrid recognizes that he has finally surpassed the level he reached before Ragna began rebuilding his sword. Enkrid grins through the strain, visibly thrilled that repeated deaths have transformed difficult swordwork into measurable progress. Enkrid charges through another bloodied battle, carrying fundamentals carved into his body through more than 100 deaths. At the edge of another fatal exchange, Enkrid grins. The brutal cycle has become so exhilarating that it nearly feels like madness. When Ragna offers the lesson again, Enkrid smiles and accepts without hesitation, ready to begin another today of training. The familiar exchange plays once more, but this time Ragna sees the result of more than 200 hidden lessons, and Enkrid's command of the basics leaves the gifted swordsman staring in disbelief. Ranya accuses Enkrid of hiding his ability, then admits the basic training is complete. After more than 200 repetitions of today, Enkrid has finally reached the stage where only experience can teach him more. Enkrid enters the fog, determined to test how far Ragna's completed basic training can carry him in real combat. Enkrid races through the fog in a low sprint, driving deeper into the battlefield without slowing down. Enkrid strikes the position where an enemy appeared before, only to find the memorized space unexpectedly empty. A changed attack rises from below, proving that the battle can shift and memory alone cannot replace awareness. Ranya's instruction returns clearly: use the eyes to predict, the feet to move, and the hands to complete the attack. Enkrid executes the exchange with coordinated movement, letting his whole body carry the technique instead of relying on his arms. In live combat, the basics feel completely different from the improvised swordsmanship Enkrid depended on before Ragna's training. eager to test that difference, Enkrid charges the next opponents and demands that they come at him. Rather than escape, Enkrid asks the enemy soldiers to settle the encounter with swords so he can keep testing himself. The soldiers stare at Enkrid and call him crazy, unable to understand why the surrounded man is inviting more combat. A dying enemy suddenly speaks a theatrical curse, and the strange words make the fatal attack feel unnatural. When the day resets, Rem catches Enkrid staring into space while he tries to understand the bizarre phrase. Enkrid turns to Rem and asks whether he knows anything about spells, searching for an explanation of the strange battlefield effect. Rem agrees to explain and begins by asking whether Enkrid understands the difference between ordinary magic and spells. Rem explains that every spell requires a medium, and that the medium matters even more than the spoken incantation. The answer clicks for Enkrid. The flag is the medium sustaining the fog, so destroying it should break the spell. Rem adds that true spellcasters are rare, and that most people using these powers are actually hexcasters. Enkrid returns to training, where Ragna recognizes that their sword methods share roots in the old Oniak technique. Rania introduces Leonesis Oniak, the child prodigy who killed 12 bandits with nothing but a fireplace poker. At 10, Leonesis begins losing his strength and collapses beside the sword he could once wield with extraordinary skill. At 20, the paralyzed swordsman transformed history by compiling the continent's techniques into 5 fundamental categories. Generations of armored Oniak swordsmen stand as proof that Leonesis transformed his family into the Empire's greatest sword house. Rania names the regional sword traditions and places his own technique within the powerful northern heavy sword lineage. Then he raises his blade and introduces single-point concentration. Forget the surroundings and focus only on the 2 swords. Rania's demonstration flashes past Enkrid's guards so quickly that the blade nearly takes his head before he understands the movement. Rem storms between them, furious that Ragna's lesson could decapitate their leader, while Ragna treats mortal danger as useful concentration. Rem and Ragna trade insults about northern and southern barbarians until Enkrid cuts their argument short. Rania tells Enkrid to remember his alertness near death, when everything can fade except the enemy's weapon and its path. Back in the fog, Enkrid identifies the flag as the spell's medium and understands that destroying it could save his unit. Enkrid surges through the fog with his sword raised, fixing his next objective: destroy the flag. Enkrid considers bringing Rem and Ragna through the fog, knowing their strength could make the route toward the flag much easier. He rejects the shortcut for now. Until the solo route proves impossible, every deadly attempt remains another chance to sharpen himself. Single-point concentration refuses to reveal itself. Enkrid faces another incoming strike, but the sword still moves too quickly for his awareness to isolate. Enkrid remembers how the heart of the beast drove him through close battlefield danger, but single-point concentration demands a different instinct. Rania says the sword tip should appear slow, but Enkrid admits that he still feels nothing resembling the described focus. Rania explains that the surroundings should blur until only the opponent's sword and predicted path remain visible. Asked how he learned the technique, Ragna can only admit that it simply happened, offering the useless answer of a natural genius. Enkrid accepts that experience must become his teacher, then turns toward the battlefield with one urgent objective: break the flag. The fog drops again, and Enkrid immediately commands everyone down with shields raised. Hundreds of remembered deaths let him answer the ambush before panic can consume the formation. After 300 repetitions of today, Enkrid knows the volley's timing with his eyes closed. He slips through the invisible attack window and vanishes from enemies who expected another helpless target. Enemy soldiers stare as one lone man bursts from the fog, then shout for everyone to stop the approaching lunatic. Enkrid opens a path through the formation with a committed sword strike, forcing the first defenders away from his route. Deeper inside the enemy line, Enkrid keeps cutting forward through full ranks, preserving momentum toward the distant flag. After 10 repeated todays, Enkrid finally reaches the first flag and destroys it, completing the route refined through countless deaths. The fog remains. Enkrid stares into the unchanged whiteout, realizing that the flag he destroyed was not the true medium. The hidden caster mocks Enkrid and reveals the deception. The flag he broke was only one of several prepared decoys. Faced with 6 flags and only one real medium, Enkrid resolves to search the remaining positions until he finds the truth. His squad questions why he keeps running alone, while Enkrid accepts the 1 in 5 gamble among the remaining flags. Before the invisible volley lands, Enkrid shouts perfectly timed orders to get down and raise shields. A failed run exposes Enkrid's pacing mistake. After reading the battlefield, he must breathe and choose the right moment to continue. With the timing corrected, Enkrid reaches the second flag after 3 more repeated todes. The second flag is another fake, leaving 4 possible locations for the spell's real medium. Reaching the third flag costs Enkrid 5 more todes, but that position also proves to be a decoy. The fourth flag takes 7 additional todes to reach, only to reveal the same empty trick. Only 2 flags remain, and Enkrid studies their positions before deciding which possibility deserves the next attempt. He chooses the innermost flag, reasoning that the true medium should be protected at the deepest point of the formation. The next loop begins with the same blindness, panic, and descending arrows. Enkrid repeats the shield warning, conserving every breath for the longer route toward the innermost position. Enkrid calls Rem forward and points him toward the enemy line, turning the barbarian's appetite for battle into a distraction. Rem crashes through to formation and opens a violent gap, allowing Enkrid to slip deeper without wasting strength on every defender. Rem brutalizes the defenders and questions anyone left standing, earning terrified cries that a monster has entered their formation. Enkrid races onward while reflecting that his deaths inside this fog now add up to more than a year of repeated todays. Enkrid drives his sword through the true flag, finally destroying the hidden medium that sustains the enemy's fog. As clear sight returns, Enkrid cuts down another soldier, unaware that the man hunting him is watching nearby. Mitch spots Enkrid through the clearing fog and believes the gods have finally delivered the rematch he wanted. Mitch steps into Enkrid's path with murder in his eyes, certain the invader will understand exactly why he came. Enkrid studies the furious stranger and answers with devastating honesty. After hundreds of repeated todays, he no longer remembers this man's face. Mitch's rage turns to disbelief when Enkrid appears to have forgotten him only a few ordinary days after their duel. Enkrid's blank reaction confirms the insult. Hundreds of hidden deaths have buried one enemy encounter beneath the weight of repetition.